welcome. I'm James Milan, and I'm here with Marian Ryan, who's Democratic candidate for Middlesex County District Attorney. Thanks for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, we're going to review the format of the interview. It will be a live-to-tape interview, and that means no edits once we begin. Answers will be limited to 2 minutes each, strictly. And we will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. So Ms. Ryan, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you so much. I'm Marian Ryan, the District Attorney here in Middlesex County. I am a career prosecutor, having done this work for over 30 years, and I bring to the job an important combination of commitment, experience, and innovation. Commitment in that this has been my life's work. For over 30 years, beginning as an intern, I've worked my way through the ranks of that office prosecuting serious cases. The experience is in line with that. In terms of this job, this is a job where experience matters. There is no lead-up time here to come to understand what it is that we need to do to protect the public safety. We have serious events happening across this very large county every day. I have that combination of leading investigations and trying serious cases. I also have the experience of putting together innovative programs that help us both to prevent and to educate with respect to crime.
Thank you very much. And we will start right in with the questions. I know, of course, you are the
Right.
city district attorney, but why are you running for re-election, and what prepares you to serve in that capacity?
I'm running because this is a job that I've spent my life doing and want to continue doing. People often say, why would you want to be in the district attorney's office? It's sad. You see so many unfortunate circumstances. I view it as a unique privilege to partner with people at what is often the worst moment of their lives. They've lost someone, they've been hurt, they've witnessed something terrible, and to take them through what can be a complicated, unfamiliar, and long process to get them to a place where there's a just resolution of the case, and also to help them to get on a road to recovery from what's happened. In addition, the challenge for us is not just prosecuting the 35 to 40,000 cases that come to us every year, but it is in reaching out and putting together those partnerships, those coalitions that will help us to educate people on how to keep themselves safe, that will help us to create innovative ways of dealing with crime, help us to be nimble enough to adjust to changes in circumstances, new kinds of challenges, whether it be opiates or cyber that we face, all aimed at protecting the public safety.
Okay, thanks. And what are the biggest challenges at the moment facing the district attorney's office, and what priorities would you support in addressing these challenges?
We have, as I mentioned, challenges change all the time. We've, as in Middlesex County, as we have across the state and across the country, for instance, in the last year or so, we've faced a challenge from opiates. We have, as I divide them up, really a number of different groups of challenges. We have the challenge, obviously, of always doing our core mission, which is the prosecution of serious cases. Just in Arlington in the last year, we've had a number of serious cases happen here. We have to be doing that investigation, doing the prosecution of those cases, and always looking to the integrity of those cases and the convictions that we hope will result from that. We also have to be looking at protecting certain groups of, not just the public safety in general, but we focus particularly on some of our more vulnerable groups. I've spent a lot of time here in Arlington working with children, working with the elderly. We have the continuing efforts that we make with respect to domestic violence, as I mentioned, the drug issues, and clearly what has become an issue, and it develops every single day, are the cyber challenges that we face both for children in terms of the scams, if you will, that may be targeted at the more vulnerable, and also in looking towards that education piece that we always want to be stretching in getting information out to the public.
And please give us 2 examples of how you think the Office of the District Attorney could have done either more or better in the last year and a half, and if re-elected, whether there are changes that you would pursue.
I think one of the areas where we have made great strides in the last year is in looking at the question of bail. I implemented a policy just about a year ago requiring 2 eyes on bail. As may not be so well known. Typically, a defendant comes into a district court under arrest. That's one route, probably the most popular way that a case starts. And the young assistant district attorney in that court is looking at a number of factors and making a request for bail. It's my view that those decisions benefit from discussion with more senior colleagues, that we make a more informed decision. We now have a rule across the county that every bail decision in a serious and domestic violence case will have two sets of eyes on that. So everybody will be having a discussion with a supervisor with respect to what their recommendation is going to be. We also have taken some great efforts in terms of looking at the opiate issue. I've taken really a four-pronged approach to that, both in terms of immediate response, the response with the Narcan and Revival, an education piece, a treatment piece, and also an enforcement piece when we look to those individuals who are not supporting their own, perhaps, addiction, but really profiting at the expense of others in terms of moving large amount of product.
And to what would you attribute what might be considered a high staff turnover in the last year and a half? Are there lessons that should be learned, and how might you improve staff retention going forward?
Across the Commonwealth, unfortunately, district attorney's offices experience a fairly high turnover of staff. And there's a variety of reasons for that, one of which is it's a hard job. It's a very hard job. There's a lot of stress in that job. There's not terribly much compensation. Our young lawyers come to us from some of the best law schools in the country, often burdened with a great deal of student debt. And a starting district attorney in our office earns $37,500, which, as the Mass Bar Association report this year in terms of prosecutorial compensation pointed out, is actually less than the custodial staff in the courthouse. So across the state, we have seen, we are fortunate in being able to fill our incoming class with bright, eager, young lawyers who want to do public service. They then, 3 or 4 years out, realize that the compensation they're able to be paid is inconsistent with the life choices, family choices they need to be making. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have anticipated well the following question, so excuse me if it asks you to,
Sure.
to tread the same ground, but since the pay for assistant prosecutors and administrative staff is discretionary within the confines of budgetary constraints, what criteria would you use to set the salaries of staff so that they are fair and equitable?
Well, part of the issue is, in terms of right now, the budget that we receive from the legislature, well over 80% of that is committed to salaries already. So that leaves us a very small amount for which we pay the normal expenses like rent and utilities, that sort of thing, as well as all the case-associated expenses, whether it be experts, transcripts, so many other things. I have, over this past 16 months since I've been in office, been able to, by a combination of methods and being very frugal in how we spend our money, been able to provide increases to our staff. Again, when you're starting at 37.5, even a percentage of that is not a very great increase.
Mm-hmm. In your experience, how do you balance generally whether to emphasize rehabilitation and community-based solutions or incarceration? And if you can give us specific examples, that would be great.
Well, every case has to be looked at on its own facts in terms of the nature of the offense, the public safety risk, the nature of the offender, his prior record, the possibility of education, employment, all of those things in which they're willing to engage. We have a very robust program in my office in terms of diversion, taking individuals in certain kinds of crimes who may have little or no prior record, giving them an opportunity both to be held accountable, but to preserve the status of their record so it doesn't affect their employment or educational opportunities going forward. I have also worked very closely with a number of legislators, particularly Senator Eldridge, in supporting the restorative justice practices. We do have that program within our office. There's a program that looks to, either in combination or separately from other sanctions, such as probation or incarceration, looking at having an offender and those who've been harmed come together and reach some consensus. There's a punishment imposed imposed by the restorative justice circle, or recommended, I should say, recommended punishment, and an offender can choose to accept that and have his case resolved in that way in certain circumstances. So we have really taken a very progressive approach in terms of looking at what alternatives are. There are obviously a whole range of offenses. There are a whole range of offenders. And the most serious sanctions, some long state prison sentence versus a diversion program or some other alternative sentencing, are all available depending on the facts of a particular case.
Okay, thank you. Do you support or oppose the ongoing expansion of government surveillance and collection of telephone and electronic communications from Americans? And again, if you can please explain your reasoning.
Well, that's a very broad question. There are certainly cases where there's a great public danger presented, for instance, and we are able to use certain kinds of electronic information in helping us to alleviate that danger, whether it be a missing child, whether it be an individual who may have committed a violent offenses in the process of fleeing. So I think we would all agree that those are good uses of technology. With respect to uses of others, the law in Massachusetts, and this is not obviously discretionary because it's what the legislature has already passed, is fairly rigorous in terms of what the requirements are for search warrants, for judicial supervision, and in particular what kind of information can be collected under various sets of circumstances. So I think that citizens in Massachusetts are fairly well protected in terms of the statutes that exist governing their electronic conversations or data.
Okay. And here's a deceptively simple question, I would say. What makes you the best candidate?
The qualities that make me the best candidate for district attorney are some of the things I mentioned before. The first is experience. As I mentioned, this is a job where, as we've seen, certainly over the past year, I was appointed in the midst of the April bombings last year. I've been in Arlington any number of times in response to serious crimes over the last year. Those are events that are outside of our control, but they require somebody who can do a number of things, who can make the real-time decisions that protect the public safety, who can make the decisions that going forward in a case that's going to be prosecuted, you make those decisions right now that will affect the outcome and the decisions that the court will be making in a trial 2-3 years from now. And then further, and that's a particular quality that I bring to this job, is in addition to extensive trial and litigation experience, I have a very solid, very long record of appellate experience. So at the same time that you're making the immediate decision of what do we do, we're looking down the road at the trial, and then I'm also, based on that experience, able to go further and say 10, 15 years from now when the court is reviewing this case perhaps on appeal, what are the actions we need to take today that will ensure the integrity of the conviction if that's what results from the trial. There's that piece. And the second is that prevention and education piece. This is a year in which we have a number of wonderful candidates across the range of constitutional offices talking about what they would do. I'm in the fortunate position of being able to talk about what I have done and am doing. I've spent a number of years, both as the general counsel and the district attorney, doing this work, putting these programs together, bringing the stakeholders together. That's why I'm fortunate to enjoy the support of so many of those stakeholders in my candidacy. That's something I hope to continue to have the privilege to do.
Thank you. And our last question is if you can give us an example of an issue that you and your opponent agree on, and 2 examples of issues on which you differ, and why your own positions would represent the best interests of the Commonwealth.
I would say the one issue I believe we are in agreement on, I believe we both support the idea of something different than mandatory sentencing, particularly as that might relate to drug offenses. With respect to other issues, I can't say that I'm that familiar with my opponent's positions on some of those other issues. I certainly can speak to why I think I have done the work of doing this task, and also put together those programs and other innovations that best ensure the public safety.
Okay. Thanks very much, and that concludes this portion of the interview, and we now invite you to give a 1-minute closing statement.
Thank you. Going forward, there are lots of decisions to be made in this electoral season, and I would suggest that in making a decision on the office of district attorney, it is one in which experience matters. That this is a job in which you need a career prosecutor for some of the reasons I've mentioned, because things happen in real time, because public safety is a real issue, because at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when something goes bad, you need to have a solid base of experience. I bring this to that job. I bring to this job having prosecuted the least serious to the most serious cases in this office. Coupled with that, I bring the experience of having seen a case, not only taken a case through the process of litigation to trial, but then also having followed it through to to the highest court in Massachusetts, to the Supreme Judicial Court, in terms of looking at what we need. I also bring the experience of having put together groups and individuals who are all concerned for public safety, helping them to work together and develop programs that best ensure that, as well as a legislative piece.
Thank you very much. And we do want to thank Ms. Ryan for participating in our conversation today. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th. For Arlington Public News, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us.